Hello! It is the Doctor's Kitchen live. Yes, we are doing a live with the incredible Jenna Macciochi, who will be on very shortly. Got another couple of minutes. I've never done an Insta Live with anyone before, so this is going to be all very new for me. Today's topic is going to be on coronavirus, everything you need to know about coronavirus, and that's why I thought I would get an expert to talk about it, because there is a lot of fear mongering. I'm just going to write the name of what we have here. So coronavirus, Q and A with Dr. Jenna. And she is coming out with a book, and it's never been a better time for a book to come out, I think, on immunity, because everyone's so interested in immunity right now. I'm just going to see if I can find Jenna. Okay, why do I do this? So go live with, where is she? Okay, she's not here yet, but hopefully she'll be here soon. She's putting her kids away. Oh, very cute. But anyway, yeah, so we're going to be talking about everything, including Jenna's new book, which is all about how to look after immunity, why immune health is so important, what immunity actually is something I cover in my second book, The Doctor's Kitchen Eat to Beat Illness, where I go through different parts of the body, different conditions, and talk about how nutrition and lifestyle, importantly, has an impact on all those different things. So, very important. Anyway, let's see if she is online yet. No, I can't see. Maybe she doesn't know how to add. Let's see if I can find her myself. So, right, Jenna. Yes, requests. No. It's weird how Instagram doesn't allow you to do this like before. Like, I just like call Jenna up and then we do like a live Skype or something like that. But anyway. I've got loads of questions from you guys already. We're going to be talking about what coronavirus is, how it's different, why there is a lot of panic around it at the moment, what the potential treatments are, where it came from, a whole bunch of questions that you guys asked us. So hopefully when she does arrive, then we'll just go into it straight away. But she is the expert, and that's exactly why I wanted an immunologist to come on and talk about it, because I don't think people are getting the right information, and you're getting like snippets as well, whether it be on a radio show, whether it be on the news. It was like a very, very small snippet, and really you want context, and so you want to compare it to other viral outbreaks, what we experience seasonally every year and across the globe, why this is so different to, say, Ebola or SARS or something like that. So those are the sorts of things that we want to be talking about. So yeah, let's see. There's a really loud siren going past the studio at the moment. It's not for me. Ah, there you go. Let's see if Jenna can make it. This is weird. I've never done this before. So, hey!
It works.
How are you?
Good, thank you. How are you?
I'm really well. I was just saying that I've never done this before, so this is all very new for me.
I think I've done it once, but yeah, I was never the initiator, so I was just hoping that you knew how it would work.
Cool. And there's an ambulance that literally just went past right now, and so it's very fitting for today's topic. But yeah, how are you anyway? Just so, because
yeah, really good.
Yeah.
I know, it's been a busy couple of months. It's been really busy. Yeah, I'm really good. Yeah, managed to get the kids asleep in time, so fingers crossed we don't have any little gate crashes. Fingers crossed.
Nice. And your book is coming out in April?
Yes, I know. I just realized today it's 6 weeks. In fact, I'm using it to hold up the phone because I have my copy came in the post the other week from publishers. So
amazing.
Wedging the phone in position. Yeah, so it's kind of exciting. but yeah, it's definitely a time to think about your immunity.
Yeah, definitely. And like, so we did a podcast on immunity, everything to do with immune health generally, what immune health is, how that relates to inflammation. I remember at the time, I was like, I just cannot wait for you to write something that's super accessible and, you know, just spells everything out. Because I think immunity in general has a lot of misinformation around it. And I really hope your book's going to tackle that. So
yeah, well, that was kind of why I started on Instagram. So I got really fed up of seeing people writing loads of rubbish about the immune system, and I was like, wait a minute, where's it coming from?
Totally. So before we get started, do you want to just introduce people again who perhaps haven't come across you before, what you do and what an immunologist is and what we're going to be talking about today?
Yeah, so I'm, as we said, I'm an immunologist, which is a doctor of the immune system. So for the last 20 years, I realized I've been working in this field. I'm currently at the University of Sussex, and I've kind of worked in all different areas of immunology, from asthma, airway disease, chronic inflammation, autoimmunity, and then more recently went down the path of like nutrition, and then broadened that out to look at lifestyle, really, because I feel like that nutrition is only sort of one pillar of health. So yeah, started the Instagram, which then just kind of took off, and recently wrote a book, and that's about to come out in 6 weeks. So yeah.
Great. I can't wait to have you back in the pod as well, and we'll talk more in depth about the book and everything else around that. So that's brilliant. So why don't we dive into this? Why don't we start by defining what corona is? I think there's a lot of misinformation exactly what it is, what type of virus it is, and why this is causing the anxiety amongst media outlets and therefore people.
Yeah, I think it's a really good place to start. So coronavirus is a collective term for a family of viruses, and they generally cause illnesses around things like the common cold to things that are a little bit more serious. The interesting thing about viruses is they're not even really considered, I think the right words to say, but they're not really a living thing on their own. So they require a host in order to replicate themselves and propagate themselves. So they're just a tiny little bit of genetic material surrounded by some proteins, and they have to get into our own cells. Oh, sorry, something just fell down. Hijack our genetic machinery inside our cells and use that to replicate themselves and then burst out. So they're kind of they need us. They need some kind of host. So this new coronavirus, it's officially termed, I think, SARS-CoV-2. So the SARS-CoV-2 is the name of the virus, and then COVID-19 is the name of the illness if you catch it. So the CO is for corona, the VI for virus, and then the D for disease, and then 19 is obviously the year that it originated.
Great. So that's really good to know, because I think a lot of news stations are using all of those terms interchangeably. Yeah. It's like corona, COVID-19, SARS, you know, it's all sort of being mixed up. So differentiating it into all those different things is really useful, particularly corona itself, because that's something that we've come across in the past, obviously. Yeah,
exactly. So there was a SARS outbreak a few years ago, and this virus is thought to be quite closely related to it. So it's thought to have originated, they both thought to have originated from a bat. So the one from several years ago and also this outbreak. But the interesting thing is that somehow this one, in the 2019 one, seems to have a little bit of genetic material inside it from a type of swordfish that swims in the South China Sea. So we think that it went from a bat to the swordfish, and then the fish maybe ended up in the fish market, and then this is how it made the jump to humans. And I think you know, another kind of interesting thing about viruses is that they have this property where they're constantly mixing up their genetic material, and they're constantly finding new ways to get into new hosts so they can propagate themselves. So they're losing and mutating bits of genetic material, they're gaining bits of genetic material. And we're part of that process because we host them, and when they're inside us, they have the ability to do that. And the type of virus that this one is, a single-stranded RNA, they have quite a strong predilection to do this sort of mutations, and yeah, they want to get into you know, different hosts, and also to try and evade our immune responses. So that we've sort of evolved this interesting process.
And on the subject of mutation, I think a lot of people are concerned about it mutating faster than we're able to develop our own immune responses, and also potentially use therapies as in vaccines to try and prevent it in the first place, or later on. So is that something that we're concerned about at this point, or is it too early to tell?
I think it's very too early to tell. I think we don't quite know how it's going to behave, because it's the first time that this particular virus is being seen in humans. So it's perfectly possible that it could mutate further. And I think there was one study in the last few days someone alerted me to, where they think there was two strains, one causing a more serious COVID-19 and one causing a less serious one. So that still has to be verified, but it's definitely possible. And I think that is something we'll only learn more about as time goes on.
Putting that in context, because I think to a lot of people that sounds scary. How does that compare to viruses that we come into contact with more generally, and more specifically the viruses that we see on a seasonal basis?
Yeah. Oh, yes. So think like the sort of comparison with flu, I think, is something that people might have seen a lot in the media. I think when we look at the patterns and sort of try and learn from other viruses like influenza, like the previous SARS outbreak, we can use that comparison to try and help us understand how this might behave. It's sort of the best we've got in lieu of, you know, not knowing what the future might hold. So I think it's probably unlikely that we will see this mutating into something much more sinister than it already is, but it's not something that we could completely exclude. Gotcha.
Yeah. Great. Okay. So I put out a call for questions. There's tons of questions, as you can see, coming out right now as well. We'll get to probably all of them, if not most of them. We've already talked about the definition of COVID and this particular type of coronavirus. When it comes to a pandemic and an epidemic, what do we actually mean by those different terms? Because I think, again, those have been bandied around, and it sounds really scary.
Yeah.
But in reality, you know, is this something that qualifies for those terms?
I mean, I think it's, again, that the media using terms interchangeably and not according to their proper definition, a bit like with you know, the name of the actual virus and the disease, that the media are using that interchangeably. But the epidemic is generally when we've got an outbreak of a disease that's actively spreading, it's spreading rapidly, it's affecting a large population of people. And then pandemic more relates to like the geographical movement of that infection. And then if we look at things like a seasonal flu, so we kind of know that every winter there's a flu season that's talked about. That's not an epidemic, or it doesn't have any sort of pandemic qualities, because we know it's coming and we can somewhat predict it. But then there may be flu epidemics when there's a totally new strain that appears, you know, and then that's a kind of different situation. So yeah, it's definitely worrying because of how rapidly it spreads, and it seems to spread more than influenza does. So that's why it's being termed a pandemic, because we're seeing it pop up in so many countries.
Yeah. Okay, great. So when it comes to, because I'm getting asked about this quite a bit, when it comes to symptoms, how do we differentiate between symptoms of common flu or common viral illnesses versus this particular strain?
I think the truth is that you can't, because people who have been diagnosed with this COVID-19 have had everything from really severe symptoms to mild symptoms. And those symptoms are similar to what you might experience if you get a cold and flu, which is you might have a bit of a temperature, a cough, you may have a sore throat, sneezing, you may experience some congestion, all those kind of typical respiratory symptoms. So unless you get properly tested, there isn't any way to know if it is this COVID-19 or just some other respiratory infection. And I think that's why I would not trust a lot of the figures that you see in the media, because there's so many cases that are still undergoing testing. We don't know exactly what is COVID-19 and what is something else yet. So I think it's very hard to get an accurate picture on how many people actually have the infection, but the data is changing all the time as well. So I'm always reluctant to put figures out because it would probably be out of date immediately.
Yeah, there is actually like a dynamic map that is on the internet at the moment that demonstrates where and how many cases each country have got, and people are addicted to looking at this map.
Oh, really?
I know people personally that are looking at this like every 2 or 3 hours, and you can just see the numbers go up and down. But as you said, it's most likely going to be an underestimation, if anything. But I think that also speaks to the big thing in the room, which is actually a lot of people are having and recovering from these from this particular virus without ever being tested and being absolutely fine.
Exactly. Yeah, we just don't know. They don't know if they actually had COVID-19 or something else, and they, within a week to 2 weeks, they've got over the symptoms. And I think that's part of the problem when we think about the spread as well, because people are then spreading it without maybe realizing that that's what they've got, and then it's very hard to pinpoint where the spread started at a particular part within a country.
Yeah, exactly. So when it comes to people who should be concerned, well, actually, no, let me reframe that question a bit better. Out of the whole spectrum of different people who could come into contact with the virus, out of everyone, who should be a little bit more worried? Because I've got questions from people who are taking biologics, immunosuppressive and who also have comorbidities like COPD and as well.
I think like the key thing is that everybody should be vigilant, because I've spoken to people and I've had discussions with people that I'm in the young and healthy category, so I don't need to worry because if I catch it, it's probably not going to be that bad. But I'm thinking, well, you also have a role to play, because if you go about your daily life, you're at risk of spreading that to the vulnerable people in the community. So we kind of all have a role to play. And if you are in the vulnerable category, which would be people who are elderly or have an underlying condition or are on immunosuppressive drugs or anything, then you need to take extra care, because these are the most vulnerable people. And I would say that obviously it's hard to make a kind of blanket statement because different conditions will mean different things. But if you have, for example, an autoimmune disease, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're more susceptible unless you're on specific medications that might suppress your immune system, in which case you may be more susceptible. And I think that people should not just stop taking immunosuppressive medications, but they really need to keep in touch with their healthcare professional, tell them that they're concerned or they're worried, or should they take extra precautions, make sure they have all the medications that they need in good supply, and just follow any guidance there. I think that's the best protocol. If you are immunocompromised, so you have some problem with your immune system or on immunosuppressives, then if you do get infected, you might actually not have such severe symptoms, because a lot of the symptoms are from your immune system fighting the infection, but you might get more severe complications and you might obviously not be able to fight it off. So again, that's perhaps a little confusing for people to hear that their symptoms might be different or milder to someone else having it. So I think it can also be confusing for people.
Yeah, I'm going into I'm working in A&E this weekend again, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to come into contact with a lot of people who are going to be
Yeah,
concerned because they're
yeah,
going to be on biologics and
yeah,
methotrexate and a whole bunch of other things, treating a range of issues from rheumatoid arthritis to IBD, a whole
yeah.
bunch of issues. So if they come in with mild symptoms, do we have any guidance on whether we should be blanket testing them if they do have any sort of virus symptoms, or has that not been established yet?
That hasn't been established yet. I think there should be good supplies of um, the kits that can detect the genetic material of the virus in samples. But it also depends. It's a tricky one because it depends on where, you know, when you take a sample of a patient, how much the virus is shedding, because you're trying to pick up its genetic material with this specific test. So it's also not a kind of easy yes/no diagnosis. It sort of depends on the stage of the infection as well. But I don't know that they've released any particular guidance on anyone who's at risk and testing.
They haven't to us at the moment.
Yeah.
I think we're getting briefed every day
Yeah.
that we're in clinic, and then there. I mean, we have protocol, but the protocol mainly states point of contact, as in people who've come from high victim areas like Iran, Italy, and China,
Yeah.
obviously, and South Korea. But other than that, there isn't any specific advice about having to test. Otherwise, honestly, we'll just be testing everyone.
Yeah.
And that's just not feasible. I mean, we don't test everyone for influenza. And the thing that I think is important to note is with those who have diabetes or COPD or a whole bunch of other conditions, or even undergoing chemotherapy, the same things would apply for seasonal flu as well. You're more at risk and you're of getting the different types of flus that we have every year, as well as having more complications. So in my mind at this point, correct me if I'm wrong here, I don't see the difference at this point, and I wouldn't do anything different apart from making sure that more vigilant as they are already for things like influenza.
Exactly. And there's also the worry that, you know, the vulnerable people might also get a seasonal flu at the same time as, you know, potentially catching COVID-19. And then, you know, that's sort of double blow to someone who's maybe already at risk. So we have to remember that it's still flu and cold season.
Yeah, exactly. People are asking about when this virus is going to die out, and if the trajectory will change as we get into the warmer months. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so I think that, you know, we don't know for this particular virus because it's so new, but we can look to what we do know from previous outbreaks of similar viruses, and what we do know about viruses in general and respiratory viruses like colds and flus, that they do tend to prefer the cooler climates. So we would hope that as we move into spring, that would affect the virus's ability to transmit and be viable. You know, like when it's coughed or it leaves the person who's got the infection. But I have to caveat that you know, that's a prediction based on the best that we know, and it doesn't mean that this virus will behave the same. I think we don't know when we're going to be at the sort of the peak of infection, but the main efforts at the moment is to try and stop transmission, so you never get this high peak. You kind of just would get a more spread out lower peak. So that's kind of the best we've got. We need to take care of the vulnerable people and just try and limit transmission. And I think you have to remember that, you know, these infections have evolved with us, and, you know, throughout evolution there's always been things trying to infect us, and our immune systems have always been trying to fight that. So it's this dynamic thing that's going on, and I think because nowadays we don't experience severe infections so much as perhaps we did pre-vaccine, pre-antibiotics, that, you know, it always comes as a really big shock and makes us feel really vulnerable, and you know, we don't know what's going to happen, and I think that just is a breeding ground for anxiety anyway. You know, the unknowns, and the situation's changing every day, but there's really so much that we're still kind of struggling to get a hold of, and I think that's really, you know, concerning for people, and that's probably what's made this such a big deal, and plus we have 24/7 media that we need to fill, so there's always like rolling media, you know, with the updates and everything. And I think that kind of you know, I personally follow it because it's interesting and it's part of my profession, but for somebody who's really concerned, that can actually be a breeding ground for more stress and anxiety.
Yeah, and hence the number of questions that we've got about this.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the spread, so you mentioned a little bit about person-to-person spread. How else does it spread, and what is the sort of transmission time? So if it was to come in contact with a surface, how long does it stay on that surface for? And does it depend on the type of surface and the actual environment as well?
Yeah, so that's it depends on a lot of factors. So most of the time it's going to be when you cough and sneeze, and those tiny little aerosolized particles that are coming out of you, they're containing lots and lots of viruses, because the virus has just been using your cells to replicate and make whole like armies of itself. So when they're going into the atmosphere, there's a high chance that, you know, if you're passing by, you can breathe that in. We don't know exactly how long it stays. We know that it could land on surfaces. You could touch that surface, touch your face, and then have a chance of getting infected. But I mean, we can sort of look at other coronaviruses for hints. And it seems that depending on the right conditions, so the right amount of moisture and the right temperature, it could maybe stay for a few days on a surface, but probably most of the time it's only within a few hours, and then after that it becomes kind of inactivated, so it wouldn't be infectious. So most of the time you're looking at people coughing and sneezing near you, and just having good etiquette with tissues and hand washing. But there's a possibility from touching surfaces, and I know that these days there's lots of touchscreen things everywhere. So, you know, if you're in London and there's, you know, thousands of people passing by the checkout, you know, using the touchscreen, then it's a good idea to just immediately wash your hands whenever you get the chance, or try not to touch your face or anything.
Yeah.
If you don't have the chance to.
On that note, I'm getting asked a lot about hand sanitizers and masks.
Yeah.
So I know you did a post on this, so if anyone hasn't looked at that already, make sure you go and see Jenna's post on masks and the touchscreen stuff as well that you wrote an article on. So yeah, hand sanitizers and masks. Yeah,
so masks I start with first. If you have any kind of respiratory infection, COVID-19 or, you know, flu or cold, if you wear a mask, it might stop some of that spread, because it's kind of containing what you're breathing out. But you need to, you know, change it regularly, dispose of it properly. It's not really kind of the sort of recommendation. If you're not unwell, so if you're healthy and you just don't want to catch a virus, most masks won't really do the job, so the virus can still penetrate through the mask, particularly if you've been wearing it for a while and you're breathing on it and the moisture builds up. So they're kind of not recommended. And there is a particular type of mask, I think it's called the N95, which does prevent coronavirus or viruses in general from getting through it. But before people go and, like, you know, Amazon Prime themselves a box of these masks, I think that we need to really take care of healthcare professionals who are like working on the front line, and make sure that we have lots of stocks available for the people who have to treat infected people. So so far there's not been any recommendation to just for everyone to wear masks. So unless you've got the N95, then most masks are probably not doing much good. Yeah, the hand sanitizer one is interesting. I know a lot of people say, oh, but viruses are not killed by antibacterial gels. But some of the other ingredients, they can actually denature the sort of little protein capsid around the virus. So good hand washing with soap and water is fine. 60% alcohol, or anything above 60% alcohol in a hand sanitizer, or anything with sort of bleach inside. Obviously, if you're not going to use that on your hands, but you're going to use it on surfaces if you're cleaning, they're going to be sort of your best bets. And it really is about transmission. I know people are banging on about hand washing constantly, and it just seems so like basic, but it really, you know, these germs want to transmit themselves, so we have to try and stop that. That's really the only way, that we're the best we've got really at the moment.
Absolutely. I think people disregard the simplest way of treating, which is literally hand washing. If you think about sanitation in general, it's responsible for saving millions of lives over the last few decades. And this is literally one of the best ways in which we can do it. But we should always be washing our hands, particularly in urbanized cities where viruses are prevalent anyway.
Exactly.
When it comes to treatment, what do we know about treatment at the moment? Is there anything on the pipeline? And are the treatments that we've used in the past potentially useful with corona?
Yeah, so I think they're basically trialing all sorts of antiviral drugs that we already have to see if these are going to be effective. But so far, from what I know, that treatment is just symptomatic. So it's basically treating the symptoms. So people are presenting with respiratory distress, high fever, you know, serious inflammation, then they're treating those symptoms and trying to make people as comfortable as possible. There's all sorts of, I think they've initiated hundreds of clinical trials in the last 2 months to try and look at things like making a vaccine, or they've actually started testing all sorts of random drugs that they think might have an effect on the vaccine, on the virus as well. So, but so far there's nothing. Although I think one company, just is it Moderna? They think they've got a candidate that's against the spike protein, which is the one that the virus uses to dock onto our cells like a lock and key. So it has these spikes on the outside, which dock onto the delicate cells that line our airways, and it allows it to enter into those airway cells. And then it can start replicating and doing some damage.
Great. So at this point in time, when it comes to treatment for those that are infected, which I have to stress here is crushingly low in the UK, but for those who are affected, it's supportive treatment, it's self-isolation if they're well enough, and if they're unwell, then it's things like rehydration, symptom control, monitoring for any worsening of organ function if they are elderly or they are immunocompromised. That's the main set of treatment. Yeah,
and like respiratory support, I think oxygen therapy, because the virus is damaging all those little cells in the airways, and those are the cells that allow you to get oxygen and do that gas exchange. And when your lungs are filled with immune cells and inflammatory cells that are going in there to try and kill the virus, then that's quite compromised. I think one of the things that seems to make COVID-19 unique is that the virus can actually infect cells in the lower respiratory tract. So if you think about a common cold, it tends to stay in the upper respiratory tract. So it's infecting the upper parts of the airways, and the lower parts where that gas exchange and oxygen exchange is happening, they're protected. But whereas this virus, it goes really deep into the lungs, and this is what makes it problematic, and can lead to development of things like pneumonia. You get lots of fluid, and you're not able to perform the function that your lungs are designed to do so well.
And I've just seen a couple of comments come up there whether people should go to their GP proactively to test and see if they have corona. That's not the advice. Your GP will not be happy if you have appointments. If you're feeling well, do not go and see your GP.
I think it's the NHS 111 that people should call if they have any worries or concerns. Obviously, if you go out your house and you'll hop on the bus to the GP surgery, you have a potential to transmit to several people on that journey. And you know, the main thing we need to do is to stop the transmission. It's actually interesting when you look at some of the history around like the Spanish flu pandemic, like over 100 years ago, and the people who were not affected were the communities that completely cut themselves off and had no contact with the outside world. And I think it's just a testament to, you know, how easily we you know, can all be vessels for these infections, you know, without even realizing it. Even if we have mild symptoms, there's been a few discussions about the incubation period, and people saying that, oh, you can catch it when you have no symptoms. I think this has been kind of contested in the last week or so, that some people who've been traveling and just felt tired and jet lagged, and then ended up testing positive later on. They were said to be asymptomatic when they passed it on, but actually when they looked back, they think, well, I was tired and I was starting to feel a bit run down. And because the symptoms are so familiar to us, we've all had colds and flus over the years, and it gets a bit muddled, really.
Yeah. On that note, I've heard a number of different organisations have changed have done some quite drastic measures. So London Book Fair was cancelled this week. Next week. Yeah, there's a couple of football games I think that have been rescheduled. There's a trade show in Germany that's been cancelled or postponed.
Yeah.
And there's talk of a lot more sporting events that are going to be closed. Do you think those are good? And this is purely your opinion here. But do you think those are positive measures? Do you think it's appropriate? And do you think that's the right thing to do? Or do you think this is scaremongering and drastic?
It's really hard, isn't it? I think there's so much we don't know about this virus. On one hand, the sensible thing to do is to say, like, okay, stop traveling, stop huge events where there's lots of crowded people, because you just need one person who has traveled back from somewhere or met their friend who traveled back from somewhere, and and then suddenly you've got an opportunity for that virus to spread to large numbers of people really quickly. But at the same time, people want to live their lives, and it's a real tricky one, and it's a difficult call for all the government and the authorities to make. So I don't know, how do you feel about that one?
I think on one hand, I see the proactive approach of trying to limit and contain a virus that we don't know too much about. On the other hand, big swaths of closures, and I heard today that there's some financial institutions in the city that are closing for weeks at a time, and sending all their workers to work from home. That can be quite scary, and that leads to panic buying, and then people buying up and going to supermarkets. So I think it can be a bit worrying, but I kind of I'm like you, I'm on the fence about it. I'm not too sure there's a good measure or bad measure, or it's tough. The
only way to stop transmission is to stop people moving around in the world generally. I mean, that's that's kind of the bottom line, but whether it's serious enough that we should be doing that or not, that's something we're learning about every day. And I think people who are concerned and who are vulnerable should maybe be more vigilant about going to large crowded places right now.
Okay. So we've covered a lot of things. I think one of the big thing, there's two big things. People are asking about their pets and whether they can contract corona, and B, things that we can do as well as hand washing. Now, I can't stress enough, hand washing and limiting sort of contact and limiting travel, I guess, is one of the ways in which we can stop transmission. But are there any other ways in which we can heighten or support our immune system to do their job?
Yeah. So, I mean, the first question about pets, I don't know of any evidence of it being transmitted from a human to their pet so far. So we can only hope that doesn't happen. That's not to say it won't happen. So we're learning all the time. So, and the other one about our immune system. So for all of us, there are things we can do. I think part of the thing to remember is that your immunity is something, I often say this, it's something that's made, it's not born. You get a kind of set of immune system genes, and then the rest of it kind of evolves throughout your life, and a lot of it's built in childhood. So things that happen to you in childhood, you're kind of stuck with an immune system, and there's only so much you can do. But I think that sleep is going to be the bedrock of it all. I just think that's something that people have to be prioritizing if they want to not be vulnerable to infections. particularly the natural killer cells, which I'm sure you're familiar with, but these are the immune cells that love to kill viruses, and they're one of our first line defense against viruses. And if we have poor sleep, then the numbers of these cells really plummet, and that could leave us more vulnerable. So think about sleep. I think that if we do want to go down the kind of supplements route, then when your immune system is fighting an infection, that vitamin C is really important because you have an increased need for it. It's not to say that vitamin C is going to make you invincible. Zinc is really important. There's some evidence that zinc might interfere a little bit with viruses in general. I can't say for sure about COVID and this current infection, but they might prevent it from docking on to our respiratory cells, so kind of interfere with it getting inside of us, as well as loads. I'm sure you have loads to talk about in terms of phytonutrients. There's so many different phytonutrients that have been shown to have antiviral properties. So getting all your colourful veggies and following Ruby's recipes. Yeah, I don't know if you have anything you want to say about.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you another question about the population of your immune system that's located in your gut. But in general, when it comes to immune health, there's a whole bunch of different mechanisms that you can isolate and talk about when it comes to using food to support your immune system. The one that comes to mind are flavonoids. So those are the different types of pigments or different types of phytonutrients that you find in things like berries, dark vegetables. You've got like the beets and stuff like that, and a whole bunch of other unusual ingredients that you wouldn't think of, things like coffee or chocolate or the flavonoids that you find in green tea. And when you have a plethora of those different types, what they do is they get digested by your body, and then they create a whole plethora of different metabolites. Those go through your liver, they go into different parts of your cells, they have impacts on your brain health. In fact, I'm writing a paper at the moment about the association between flavonoids and reduction of neurodegenerative disease. These are all associations, and there are proposed mechanisms, obviously, so it's stuff that we're still finding out about. But generally, when you eat a different array of colours in your diet, you're giving yourself the best chance heightening and supporting your immune system to do its own work. There's also impacts on your microbes and your microbiota as well. So we know that as well as fiber, which is perhaps the most important thing, and variety, specific types of flavonoids do have impacts on your microbes that are beneficial.
I think I definitely second the fiber, because this is so important, and people often don't think about fiber in terms of their immune system. And I think in Britain we've got a bit of a problem with fiber. We think it's like this mono substance, and we don't think about diversity. We think about all bran, and not actually like beans, pulses, lentils, fruits, vegetables, herbs, spices, the whole shebang.
Exactly. And I was going to ask you, so in this week, I listen to podcasts all the time. I've done a lot of reading, and I've had a whole bunch of lectures on this as well in the last couple of weeks, my master's program. But I've heard 3 or 4 different estimates of the percentage of immune cells that are located in your gut. 60, 70, 80, and 90 in 1 week. Which is it? Can we just not? Is that like a massive estimation? And we just don't know?
Almost don't really think about like the immune system being portioned off that way, because I kind of think of the gut immune system being its own thing and not like a portion of the whole body. But I would say probably about 70% is the most accurate that I've found in terms of, if you were to add it all up and then say what's in the gut. There's a huge amount of immune cells, organs, tissues, all in the gut, and quite rightly so, because we put all sorts of things in there every day, and our immune system has to help us differentiate what's good, what's bad. Plus it's got to make this nice relationship with our microbiome, because our immune system is kind of hardwired to recognize patterns on things that are not us. So, a virus looks different to us. It's got a different genetic material. Our immune cells recognize, that's different. But, our gut is full of bacteria, which are different to us and being hardwired to react to bacteria, but for some reason they have this nice relationship with our microbiome. And I think that's, you know, that's like amazing. It's like fascinating how it's in tune with what's good for us. And yeah.
So just to summarize, because I know people are going to be asking, okay, well, what are the main things that we should be thinking about? First thing, reducing transmission, hand washing, and using an above 60% alcohol gel if you're going to be using a gel whilst you're in and around or whatever. Sleep, optimizing sleep, so you increase your natural killer cells that are going to be doing the job of fighting out any viruses, let alone, you know, this particular strain. Improving your diets by getting variety, lots of different types of fibers, beans, pulses, lentils, lots of plants, majorly, and reducing. I mean, I generally say this, but reducing sort of like, you know, sugars and refined carbohydrates that are going to be taking away for the opportunity to increase the amount of like sort of supporting ingredients that you have in your diet. Anything else?
Interestingly, I think I'd add a few things. So fasting is really popular, and I know it's quite trendy. And I know there's lots of chat about how fasting impacts your immune system, and true, it does. And there's been some preliminary studies showing remarkable effects in certain autoimmune conditions. But there's also been like several studies showing that depending on how long you fast for and what your fasting window is and all that kind of thing, your immune defenses can actually plummet and leave you really vulnerable to infection. So if anyone's playing around with fasting protocols, I think just be a bit careful that we don't quite know what is the right amount of fasting for what outcome you want, whether that's fighting an inflammatory condition or protecting yourself from infection. They might be two different things. So and same goes for like really intense exercise, particularly if you're in a calorie deficit. This can cause immune suppression. So if you're just like hitting the gym, running around with busy life, then I think just take care of that as well. And stress, stress is leading to release of cortisol. That's immune suppressive. I'm sure everyone's familiar with when they've been really stressed at work or had a lot of deadlines, and suddenly you find yourself catching every cold that's going around the office because your immune defenses are down. If you're stressed, you're probably not sleeping as well, so there's lots of kind of secondary effects on that. You might not eat as well, or you might be eating poorly as a sort of way to compensate how you're feeling. And I think like social isolation. So there's some really interesting work around how we're designed to be social, like humans have evolved to be social, and viruses are very social because they rely on us to be passed between them. And when you're in a social environment, there's some evidence that your viral defenses are enhanced. And when you're isolated and you're feeling very cut off from kind of social environment, then your viral defenses are reduced because they're not so needed, and you might be more likely to injure yourself and get a bacterial infection, for example. So you sort of prioritize that rather than viral defenses. So the socially isolated, although you can be interacting with a lot of people every day but feeling isolated, so you could be potentially exposed to things like this virus, but feeling that isolation that has an impact on your immune system. And I think just taking into account how you feel and what you're thinking, this is highly connected with your immune system. The immune system shares receptors for all these different hormones and chemicals that change our feelings, and that's sort of really underestimated in our health. In the quest for a supplement or something to fix it, it's we need to really start looking at these areas too. I'm
really glad you picked that up, actually, because I think this whole subject is causing a lot of anxiety itself. There's also the two-pronged issue of like the vulnerable and the elderly. If we're telling them to self-isolate, that's going to heighten a problem that's rife, loneliness, in a vulnerable population of elderly who I came across a statistic in a podcast I was doing recently about the number of people over the age of 65 who haven't had any interaction with anyone for a month. And it was something like 20%. I can't remember the exact number, but it was like staggeringly high. And I was like, wow, that
So
really just put it in perspective. Yeah. And the other things that you mentioned regarding supporting our immune health as well in terms of stress, I think that's something that we could all sort of learn about. So practice mindfulness, meditation, whatever the stress relieving exercise is, and then making sure you're not over exercising and overdoing it as well, because the number of times, again, like I think I spoke to you about this in my podcast as well, the number of times I see patients coming in after having had a stressful episode and they come down with the flu. It's it's anecdotal, but it's definitely something I come across.
It's definitely there, and it's definitely something probably you can, you've got colleagues who say it, or just as you're about to go on holiday, but you're doing all that work to try and finish up, and you're very stressed, then you just, that's when you're wide open to things.
Cool. Great. So is there anything else that you wanted to talk about? Because I think we've gone through a lot of the questions here, and I will make sure that this is on saved online, and then we can try and share it again. If people can't stay through the whole thing, we'll come up with a document and write down everything. Then we might have to do this again, because I think there's probably going to be more questions. But is there anything else that you think that you wanted to talk about?
I don't know, so much. I think actually one thing that I find quite interesting is that this particular coronavirus that we have at the moment is what I like to call it's not an equal opportunities killer. It seems to pick off certain demographics, and I think that this is kind of the way I learned about the immune system many years ago was that we're all immunologically unique, and we have these really unique ways that immune genetics happen that allows, even in identical twins, they would have different immune cell receptors. So there's a reason for that. There's a reason that we don't all respond the same to an infection, because if we got a big pandemic like this, we would just die out as a species, because we'd all react exactly the same. And if we all reacted really badly and we all died, there would be no more humans. So we're all immunologically unique, and that means that some people seem to be more susceptible to this infection. We've already talked about vulnerable people, elderly people, but also it seems to have an unfair predilection for men. So they seem to be worse hit. We know in general that men seem to suffer infections worse. And this virus seems to be showing that pattern as well. And there's very small studies showing that maybe there's differences in geographical location and differences in race, and this is to do with the expression of the receptor that the virus uses to get into the cells. So men seem to express this receptor more. It's the ACE receptor, ACE2, which is the angiotensin converting enzyme, which you probably know in terms of blood pressure and stuff, but the virus uses this as a little lock and key to get in. And they think that in Asian populations, they may express more of this, but this is a very small preliminary study, so we don't know for sure, but this can explain why some people seem to be hit with it harder than others, which I think is really remarkable. But in a way, diversity is a good thing, because it means that we're not all going to be wiped out in one viral swoop, so to speak. Yeah, absolutely. And I think having variety in terms of our response to the virus is overall a good thing. I remember us talking about this on the pod actually, and how men do seem to have worse symptoms of general seasonal flu as well, because of this receptor. It didn't go down too well with a few more female colleagues. I know. Well, women get more of other things, so it's kind of like I often think there's no hierarchy in immunity. Like there's nobody's got a better or worse immunity. You might just be more likely to get certain types of infection than other types. So it can be like the before I forget. There's a couple of questions about children and why. So there doesn't. I haven't come across any children below the age of 10 that have. That seems to be the case. It seems that they may be carriers, so they may be spreading the virus, but they don't seem to get the symptoms that adults do. And this can be, there's a few reasons that they're kind of postulating. Children's immunity is still evolving. It's slightly different. We think they may have more aggressive innate immune responses. This is like the first line of defense, so they may be like cutting it off very quickly before it really takes a foothold. But it also could be to do with they may, like, kids pick up a lot of respiratory viruses, so they may have very active immune protection to similar viruses that seem to be protecting them from this one. So there's a few different mechanisms at play, and they're not exactly sure why. But yeah, definitely children appear to be protected.
That's great. I think that's very reassuring to a lot of people at the moment, but still to be vigilant if there are children with multiple comorbidities.
Yeah, exactly.
I know I've got colleagues who've got children who are undergoing chemotherapy, unfortunately. So those same rules will still apply when it comes to being vigilant, hand washing, and being, aware of any worsening symptoms.
Yeah, definitely.
Great. Jenna, we've been going for like an hour. I'm conscious you just put your kids to bed, so we should probably wrap it up. But please let us know when your book is out and the title again, and I'll make sure link to this, because I want my copy as well. So
I know you've got to hit up the publishers. They've only sent me one so far, so I'm going to
call them up myself.
It's 6 weeks today, and it looks like this. So it's called Immunity: The Science of Staying Well, and it's kind of just your little handbook to your immune system. There's a bit of myth busting in there, and some fun facts, as well as some more kind of serious stuff. So amazing. I'm hoping that people like it, because they had to cut like 50,000 words, so I need to do a second one. So hopefully people enjoy this one, and then I've got lots of ideas fizzing around in my head that I want to do for part 2 if I can. But yeah, I really appreciate the support. It's not easy. I mean, I have a full-time job and 2 kids, and I do this because it's fun, and I really enjoy talking about science to anyone that's going to listen. So all the support is like massively appreciated.
That's great. Well, I can't wait to push it when it's out, before it's out.
Thank you.
Really dig into it. And I put an endorsement on it as well, because it really is from the heart. But I'll let you go. Thank you very much to everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everyone who tuned in. And we'll try and wrap up any final questions maybe in some kind of document or something. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. See you later. Bye.
Bye now. Bye.